Well, hello and welcome to Business 360. I'm Ashmit Kumar, and here are the headlines that we're tracking this evening. Market ends with gains for the second straight day in a row. All sectoral indices except Nifty FMCG trade in the green. The rupee ends weaker compared to yesterday. Mock drills conducted across hospitals in India to check preparedness of health facilities as the government steps up its COVID vigilance. Only 163 new COVID cases reported in the last 24 hours as active cases hover around the 3,400 mark. No new deaths have been reported. Bharat Biotech says that its intranasal COVID vaccine Innovac has been priced at 800 rupees for private marketers and 325 rupees for union and state governments. The vaccine will be rolled out as a booster dose for adults in the 4th week of January. The company has, however, not released any efficacy data so far. China relaxes COVID curbs further. It will be scrapping its quarantine requirement for international passengers from the 8th of January. The nation reported 20,000 new cases on an average last week. As per World Health Organization, it has not released data since the 23rd of December. The waiting period for Digital India Bill gets longer. Sources tell CNBC TV 18 that the regulatory framework still needs more work. The draft bill, which aims to replace the existing IT Act, will now be released for public comments by early 2023. Ukraine says Russian army attacked dozens of towns in eastern Ukraine a day after Moscow accused it of attacking its airbase miles away from the front line. Minister Lavrov issues an ultimatum, asks Ukraine to surrender Russian-controlled territories. Ukrainian President Zelensky says nearly 9 million people remain without electricity. North India, in the midst of a cold wave, Delhi witnesses one of its coldest December in years on Monday. The Met Department has said that the situation might be improving in the next 2 days, but predicted fresh spell of cold wave during New Year's. Well, amid the recent surge in COVID cases across the world, India's numbers have remained largely stable over the last 24 hours. India has reported 157 new COVID cases, with active cases declining marginally to a little over 3,400. Close to 50,000 COVID detection tests were conducted in the last 24 hours. Meanwhile, Bharat Biotech has announced the pricing of its nasal COVID vaccine Innovac. The vaccine has been priced at 800 rupees for private markets and 325 rupees for central and state governments. Bharat Biotech says that the nasal vaccine will be rolled out as a booster dose in the last week of January. Those above the age of 18 will be eligible to take the vaccine. The company has, however, not yet released any efficacy data. Well, staying with COVID updates, mock drills were conducted at hospitals across India to check for preparedness of health facilities amidst a rise in COVID cases in several nations. The government has already clarified that there is no need for panic and that measures are only precautionary in nature. Health Minister Mansukh Mandavia was at Delhi Safdarjung Hospital to oversee these drills. Abhimanyu Sharma gets us more on this story.
Mock drills are being conducted at COVID centers which have been prepared across the country to check for COVID preparedness. The Union Health Minister Mansukh Mandavia paid a visit to this facility at Safdarjung Hospital today morning. Several states have made such facilities where respective state health ministers are paying a visit to check for COVID preparedness. Though the situation is not severe as of now, it's not alarming. However, the governments are taking rearguard action to ensure that there is ample preparedness if at all there is a rise in positivity of COVID cases.
जो कोविड के लिए हैं 200 बेड्स हमने रखे हैं, उसमें 44 बेड तो बेकशिफ्ट हॉस्पिटल में ही हैं, जिसके अंदर सभी फैसिलिटी हमने यहाँ क्रिएट की है. पेशेंट का एग्जामिनेशन हो या उनका सैंपल लेना हो, टेस्टिंग करना हो, ऑक्सीजन लगाना हो या वेंटिलेटर पे जाना हो पेशेंट को अगर जरूरत पड़े, सब चीज़ें हमने मेकशिफ्ट हॉस्पिटल में तैयार की हैं.
The makeshift facility we are standing at right now comprises of different sections. This is the triage area where any new patient is brought in, and based on the severity of the COVID case and symptoms, the patients are segregated. The ones who are asymptomatic are sent to the usual COVID wards, whereas the ones who are displaying extremely severe symptoms are sent to the SARI ward.
If this patient is asymptomatic or only has mild fever, the patient goes to COVID ward and is managed symptomatically. But if this patient is becoming short of breath or requires high oxygen or ventilatory support, we take the patient directly to the COVID ICU.
So clearly, COVID preparedness is being looked upon not just by the center and states, but also at an individual hospital level. And doctors are making sure that ample machines, drugs and procedures are in place.
Well, let's shift focus now to China. In a complete reversal in its strategy, China has announced more steps to relax its COVID curbs. In a latest, China's National Health Commission has announced it will be dropping COVID quarantine requirements for international passengers, which includes testing and centralized isolation. Travelers who produce negative test results 48 hours before departure can enter the country without applying for the Green Health Code. The relaxations will come into effect from the 8th of January. However, the NHC spokesperson has said that they will continue to step up vaccination for the elderly and children, and that they will be focusing on meeting the medical needs of the general public.
To robustly prepare health resources with a focus on meeting the medicine needs of the general public, striving out to protect the key groups, including the elderly and children. In particular, we will step up the vaccination of the oldest citizens, and we will earnestly enhance the pandemic response in rural areas. Categorizing and managing COVID-19 as type 2 infectious disease will still need the strong support from the general public.
Well, to take this forward, I'm now joined by Jonathan Cheng, China Bureau Chief at the Wall Street Journal. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us. First question, Xi Jinping has been quoted to say that there is a new situation facing us with new tasks. We've seen these relaxation in terms of travel quarantine requirements. We've also seen, in fact, public messaging coming in from health officials talking about how this Omicron variant is not as lethal, is not as harmful for the general public. What are we seeing here? Are we seeing China trying to downgrade the effects of this pandemic, of this virus, at a time when there's unprecedented explosion of cases?
Yeah, you're right. The timing of it is certainly unusual. Many health experts have been saying for a very long time that we expected to see China eventually make this pivot, but I don't know that we expected it to happen in the middle of winter. And as you note, Xi Jinping has come out and said that there's a new situation, but this is the first he's acknowledged this reality in the past couple of weeks, because already we've seen quite a shift in policy since the beginning of December. But of course, this just adds emphasis to the fact that China really is turning the corner here and trying a whole new policy. Whether or not it will lead to mass fatalities and whether or not it will work out as smoothly as many people are hoping that it will is another matter.
Sure. Interesting to point out some of the visuals that we're beginning to get out of Beijing and Shanghai. We're seeing public transport fully occupied, people busy on the streets. We're also getting reports from areas such as Chongqing and Xinjiang, where people, despite being asymptomatic or despite having mild symptoms, are being asked to return to work. Is this a situation where the general public perhaps does feel that it's better to, in fact, make peace with this pandemic rather than to have the strict restrictions that we'd seen in the recent past?
Well, you really have both impulses that are quite strong. On the one hand, for 3 years with the zero COVID policy, I think a lot of people were just ready to move on. And on the other hand, you have this message from the government that was so strong for 3 years that this is a virus we have to be very careful about. We have to crush it everywhere it appears. So to try and reconcile those two is quite difficult. And, I think one simple way of trying to divide it is that, if you're younger, if you're healthier, if you've had your vaccinations, if you're reliant on tourism or on restaurants or on service sector jobs for your livelihood, then you're going to have to take those risks because you need to feed your family, you need to feed yourself. Now, households that have elderly people in them, which of course is most households, there may be a little bit of a complication there in that elderly people in China are the most vulnerable. Many of them have not been vaccinated to the same degree that others have been. And of course, in the depths of winter with people who are 80 years and older, you would expect them to be the most vulnerable in any country, in any situation. And so I went and visited 3 hospitals in Beijing yesterday, went to the ICUs, and there the scene was quite grim. I mean, you really saw elderly people lying in cots in the hallway of hospitals. People are not getting treatment for many hours. They have oxygen tanks, IV drips, and all this other stuff. So, you know, on the one hand, people are going to work, people are going to restaurants, people are going to cafes and bars again. But on the other hand, if you go to the hospitals, you can see that that is also part of the equation here.
So let's also factor in some of the triggers that we're expecting. The Lunar New Year is about 3 weeks away from now. There is an expected move of migrant workers in the millions from infected urban centers to less affluent cities towards the interiors. Is that expected to only aggravate the situation on the ground? The numbers are already overwhelming. Will it get worse?
Well, I think it definitely has that risk. If people are sick at the time of Lunar New Year, they probably won't be wanting to get on a train or on a plane or on a bus because they're just not in that condition. On the other hand, I think a lot of people here have seen Lunar New Year been denied them for the last 2 years, and I think are really, really keen to go home. Now, for many people in China, they work frequently in a province different from the province where they're from and from where their family is. And so many of them, this is the one time of year that they get to go home. And as I mentioned, many of them didn't get the chance to do that in 2020 or in 2021, or in many cases in 2022 as well. And so many of them are going to really want to go home, even if the risks are higher. And of course, when you take the population of China and you do the math, it's a lot of people that could potentially be infected.
Sure. Let's talk about the political overtones here. We initially saw a very tight regime where we had COVID restrictions in place, the zero COVID policy. Then we saw protests being sparked that were likened to the Tiananmen Square protests. And subsequently, we see now a dismantling of that earlier regime, a U-turn of sorts. What does this entail for the political fortunes of Xi Jinping going forward?
Well, it really depends on whether or not they can stick this landing, as it were. You know, I think there's little debate within China. Others may disagree, but there's little debate within China that 2020 and 2021 were very good years for China, with the exception of the initial few weeks in Wuhan when everybody around the world was confused and didn't quite know what this virus was. The rest of 2020 was actually very good. You couldn't leave the country, but you could travel freely, and the economy roared back to life, and that mostly continued in 2021. I think a lot of the frustration that you describe is really from 2022, watching the rest of the world open up, looking at this Omicron variant, which spreads a lot more quickly, but is believed to be less serious for many people. You put that all together, and I think a lot of people in China were wondering all year long, when are we going to be able to rejoin the global economy? When are we going to be able to have our lives back again? And as I mentioned, I don't know that anyone expected it to happen quite as quickly as it did, but whether or not we see more families who lose loved ones, perhaps they feel unnecessarily because things happen too quickly, that will have political ramifications. Of course, the flip side of it is that because Chinese people are going to be very cautious coming out of this, perhaps the number of deaths won't be to the same proportion as in other places, because we've had the experience of other countries and their examples. And we have had 3 years of very, very strong messaging saying, be careful when you're in a public place, take precautions, and perhaps that will work. And maybe we get to the spring, people are feeling good, the economy is coming back, and maybe not as many people died as is feared. So that's really what I think the outlook could be, but we really don't know what exact scenario we're going to get.
Right, Jonathan, thank you so much for taking out your time and sharing your thoughts and some updates on the situation there on the ground. Quite grim there, the China picture, but that's all the time that we have with Jonathan. Thank you so much once again for taking time out to speak to us. But with that, it's time now to slip into a very short break, but coming up on the other side, the waiting period for Digital India Bill gets longer. Sources tell CNBC TV 18 that the regulatory framework still needs more work. Welcome back. Here's a view from the markets now. Despite a volatile session, markets ended with gains for the second straight session. Sensex and Nifty ended over 0.5% in the green, while mid-caps outperformed. That index ended over 1% higher. Metal stocks led from the front. All sectoral indices ended higher, except for Nifty FMCG. Prashant Nair is joining us now with a quick wrap of the day's market action. Prashant.
Well, the pullback continues. A lot of people in the morning were doubting whether yesterday was a one-day wonder. And I think today's session put some of those doubts to rest. So we had a decent day and not very much by way of volatility, although the market did come off a little bit from the highs of the day. Banks did a little lesser as compared to the Nifty. I'll get to specifics. Broader markets were fine. Mid caps and small caps. Advance decline was some 4:1 in favor of advances. Metals is a space which was, did the best, 4% in the index itself. PSU banks continued to pull back, and real estate as a space did well. Actually, the FMCG index was the only one which was lower, except that most of the sectors were in the green. The top three gainers all from metals and metal indices: Hindalco, Tata Steel, JSW Steel, your Tata Motors, ONGC, and Asian Paints, which did well as well. In the broader space, PSU banks, right, IOB stood out with very large volumes. Non-Nifty metal names, JSPL, Nalco. There were smaller names like JBM Auto, HEG, Fact, Praj Industries, sugar names like Triveni, Dwarikesh, Dhampur, and data patterns which stood out as well. As I said, breadth was fairly positive and strong. The Nifty is now bumping into an important level, which is basically the rising trend line all the way from June lows. It's a clean, straight, upward sloping trend line on the break of which the market accelerated its fall, and we are now back there at about 18,140. And I think a day more, 2 days more of stable, normal kind of markets perhaps should give more confidence to the bulls that what we saw late last week perhaps was, not structural weakness, but just weaker hands getting shaken out and the market devoid of froth looking a little better. Back to you.
Right, Prashant, thanks a lot for that. Now, the government may miss its December deadline as far as releasing the Digital India Bill draft is concerned. Sources tell CNBC TV 18 that the regulatory framework being developed for digital companies needs more work. The draft bill will be likely to be released for public comments by early 2023. CNBC TV 18 also learned that the government is hoping to complete stakeholder consultation in time to table the bill in the monsoon session of Parliament next year. The bill, which aims to replace the IT Act of 2000, may also include a legal framework for blockchain and metaverse. At least 4 employees were killed in a fire incident that broke out at one of the blocks of an API manufacturing plant of Laurus Labs in Visakhapatnam. One employee is undergoing treatment. Company tells CNBC TV 18 that it has launched an investigation into the incident to determine the cause of the fire. The company also maintained it sees no material impact on its operations. Apparel retailer V-Mart Retail says that discretionary consumption is suffering as inflationary pressures continue to hurt the wallets of customers. Managing Director Lalit Agarwal added that demand has dipped sharply in December as compared to pre-COVID levels.
In the December month, we are seeing a little lull, and then people are once again, the winter was not there for the last 15 days, and then now once again in this week we are seeing winter coming back. So it is once again coming back. So largely it is driven by seasonality or festival or the need in the family, which is wedding. So need-based shopping is happening, but other than that, the aspirational levels are not getting met because there is a stress in the customer's pocket. So we are seeing a little dull from that perspective if we compare it from the pre-COVID levels.
Meanwhile, travel website ClearTrip says that it has been seeing steady demand this holiday season. ClearTrip CEO Ayappan R said that demand has been touching an all-time high in the last few days, adding that they haven't seen any holiday cancellations.
The demand has been super unpredictable. The last 12 months has been a roller coaster for all of us in the travel space, whether it's airlines, hotels, bus operators, trains. I think for everyone, learning has been the key. Through this period, because you never know what's going to happen 3 months from now. All is well for the holiday period, and we haven't seen any cancellations. The demand that we have been touching has been all-time high in the last few days, and we believe that's going to continue for weeks ahead.
Mobile device makers and technology companies in India are set to adopt USB Type-C as a standard charging port by March of 2025. The Consumer Affairs Secretary Rohit Kumar Singh said that the objective is to reduce the use of number of chargers per household and to minimize e-waste in the country. Meanwhile, mobile phone manufacturer Xiaomi has partnered with Reliance Jio to offer true 5G services to its customers. The latest updates provide eligible Xiaomi users with 5G connectivity. Xiaomi models supporting the SA network received the update. The company assured that its smartphones have undergone thorough testing to ensure seamless experience of 5G. Ukraine says the Russian army attacked dozens of towns in eastern Ukraine a day after Moscow accused it of attacking its airbase miles away from the front line. Ministers Lavrov issued an ultimatum asking Ukraine to surrender the Russian-controlled territories. Ukraine President, meanwhile, Zelensky says that nearly 9 million people remain without electricity. Taiwan says it will be extending its compulsory military service rule from the current 4-month period to 1 year from 2024. The decision comes after Taiwanese government accused China of one of its biggest incursions in the airspace. China said that the strike drills were in response to provocations from the US and Taiwan. Coming back home now, North India is in the midst of a cold wave. Delhi, in fact, is witnessing one of its coldest Decembers in years on Monday. In a conversation with CNBC TV 18, the Met Department has said that the situation might improve in the next 2 days, but predicted fresh spell of cold wave conditions during New Year's Eve.
After a long period, you know that November, December, we were not having any WD. Now the WD is coming. On 28th night, it will affect the hill area. So we have predicted the light to moderate snowfall and rain also over Jammu Kashmir, Himachal Pradesh. There may be clouding over Punjab, Haryana. After that WD passes, New Year, we may get fresh spell of cold wave and fog.
And well, with that, it's a wrap on this edition of Business 360. Thanks so much for watching. Stay tuned to CNBC TV 18. The news and updates continue on the other side.
Powered by Get Tension